I've always had a difficulty in terms of knowing where to start whenever discussing ideology. You see, to me, ideology is not one branch. It's not philosophy, it's not history, it's not politics. It's not even some kind of mashing together of those things. It's a product. It's a mixture that we can see and that we can feel and that we can act on. And so I don't like the slogan. I don't like to sell something that's not done cooking. I don't like to say, this is the easiest way to describe my philosophy. I don't like that, but I understand that people need headlines, people need things written. And so the way I would describe it is there's a start point. There's a point that helps you start to understand, and then it expands, and that can inform a philosophy. And so that's sort of a long-winded way of saying that to me, my beginning was economic. Whenever I was a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, I felt trapped within capitalism versus socialism. And now I think those terms have lost meaning and they've sort of become teams that people pick. And so I wouldn't even describe those as full ideologies. I think Marxism is a philosophy that I recognize. I don't recognize capitalism as a philosophy. I think really the argument, and it's too immediate, is should the economy be run by the people? Should it be run controlled by the government? Or should the government have no role? And that's been the only discussion. There's some nuances there. That's really the only discussion. That's really what the socialists are getting at, and that's kind of the dividing line, right? It's, do we want to have a control of the economy or do we not? And now I think we all should want control of the economy. We all should, even unless you're an extremist. So like I think in capitalism there is no control. It's the market mechanisms, it's the mechanism of misaligned incentives, it's the production line that doesn't consider consciousness or culture. So it just kind of exists. I think it's like a default form. It's a form that's not developed. And so on the other end of that you have socialism. And so far there have been many socialist attempts, but they all fall to pieces under any kind of a scrutiny. And I think the reason for that is not because the socialists are dumb. I think it's because it's a difficult and reductionist task to try and manage these things if you don't have a solid foundation. And that's where the philosophy is central. But philosophy is not where this issue starts. The issue starts economically. The issue starts over the body that we use to express our culture. And I think that's important. I think we do not consider culture enough as a driving force behind these things. And culture is not a reductionist thing. Culture is actually, it's by definition something we extract. So you can't define a culture so neatly. Um, and to me, that's where I'm at now. Whenever I started, and we all have to start from somewhere, the thought is very simple. Why there should be an economy where wealth is determined by contribution, wealth is determined by your own quality of production rather than mindless quantity. And I've developed that over time, but I think that's the core understanding. That's colonialism. That's my understanding. And I think it understands that there can't just be that simple of a definition, that things come out of that. There's prepositions that come out of that. And I think I'm not even saying that it's something I've just developed, all of this. I'm saying that it's something that needs to be built in a cultural sense and needs to kind of be enriched. And it's okay if there's wrong parts to it because we can actually go in and edit it. And that is the point. The point that I've come to out of that. The question was always, right? So I wrote a book initially whenever I was 14, 15. And what I sort of had in that book was kind of the ideas I have now, that there should be a meritocracy, there should be hierarchy, there should be kind of the there should be an individualized economic system where I decide I want to do something and I kind of pay for that if it doesn't benefit other people. And I think, and I developed a bit more than that, but where I was kind of going with that, that kind of stumped me for a bit is, well, who determines that? Because I always had the idea of the government as this force that would say whether or not your production is beneficial, whether you are a benefit on society or not. And that was a quite difficult knot to tie because you can look at governments in history that can't do that. There's an element of corruption. And that's used to justify capitalism, I think, now. Is look at all these examples where this one thing didn't work, so just have this thing that kind of works. And so I did a bit of soul searching. I did think of things over time, and so that's where I ultimately came to it's the culture. As in, I don't think culture's a primacy. I think that's reductionist, but all of our systems derive from the culture. If you're born in a country, it determines the way you speak, the way you look, the way you dress, the way you act. And I'm not saying that's your worth as a person. I'm just saying it is a necessity of the world that we are born into cultures. And so if you think about it, the way one country ends up versus another is typically due to random forces, but it's kind of cultural. And so we don't control the culture at the moment. We don't control it. So there could be an internet meme tomorrow that just dominates the Western world. There could be an idea that just is such a massive trend. There could be a new style of clothes, a new style of thought, a new style of movies, it could new values, and we don't have any control over that. It happens randomly. And I think that's what leads to degeneracy. And I don't believe in degenerate people. I believe in people who are overcome with a degenerate system. And so to me, that's where the degeneracy comes from. It's where we don't have that hook. I call it the grapple. So like I'm no better than anyone else for being born where I was born, but that's a grapple for me to have a chance to construct things. And that's the cultural element. And so I've sort of always thought we're told either here's capitalism, here's socialism, right? So you need to fix your car. There's two options: jump off a cliff or light yourself on fire. And it's a bit like, those don't even make sense. And I think there's a larger reason. We can't just dismiss these things, right? Like, we have to understand that there's a reason why people go down those paths. But I think ultimately is a degenerate cultural structure. And so that's kind of where I'm going with this, is that if we're in power and we have an oversight, we can engineer an economy to be developed upon, but eventually developed upon in a way that allows for culture as the primary mover of the economy, and that the economy reflects a larger culture. And so the product is evident of a culture that develops it. You can't reduce things into one or two forms. And that's why the meritocracy is important, because it means that we have a foothold in terms of defining our existence instead of just being thrust into things. Um, and so that to me, that's where it grows for me, from just that simple thing I had at 14, government determined by contribution to society, which was a bit of a dumb thought. And it's arrived to my overall philosophy, which is saying there's so many things. There's so many complexities. And what we need to acknowledge is we can't solve for those, but we need to answer for them anyway. And that's the human predicament in this. And so what you need then is you need a system that allows for your own action, a system that allows for those things to develop, a system that is itself developed by the culture. And so whenever people say the people, That has no meaning to me. I have nothing in common with someone else who voted for Simon Harris or someone else who voted for Donald Trump. I don't have anything in common with someone who has the identical skin tone as me. I don't have anything in common with some other random person. And so that's where it's cultural, as in, I do have in common with other people within a culture, but I think there's an individual element there. Like, I'm deriving directly from that. They're beside me, deriving from that. They're putting into it, I'm putting into it. And so that's sort of the footnotes I would say would be that not enough people are focusing on culturalizing the economy, building an incentive structure around cultural movers, and then shifting towards an individualized meritocracy that justifies itself because of its philosophical conceits. So it justifies that there should be a cultural element, and that's where consciousness comes in, which is my two most important concepts in the entire thing are culture and consciousness. And this is kind of just a bit of the culture as an economic thing. And so that's sort of where I'm going with this.